taking into consideration the refugee situation globally and especially in Armenia, since 1992, how has the UNHCR mission changed? I mean, what have been the priorities in 1992 and what are the priorities now? Do we have any change of targets in Armenia?
UNHCR was invited to come and help the refugees coming from Azerbaijan in 1992. So we are commemorating our 20th year of work in Armenia this year. In the early years, of course, our primary focus was to respond together with the government and our partners from the NGO community to meet the emergency needs of the refugees, over 360,000 of them, refugees who came from Azerbaijan. Shelter, food, health services, special programs for the children, for the elderly. Housing was the key component of our joint program with the government. Over the years, as the emergency phase was over, then we started programs aimed at the local integration of the refugees to help them achieve self-sufficiency, self-reliance through vocational training programs, support towards income-generating activities, small business development, and the like.
Following this idea of this transformation of targets, I'd like to ask you to narrow down a bit on these country primary objectives in Armenia. And in this sense, I would like to ask you to evaluate the legislative framework in Armenia in terms of refugee protection. And I'd like to ask you to do this comparatively. I mean, compared to the international standard. How much has been achieved and how much needs to be achieved, and what are the gaps?
We are pleased that Armenia adopted rather comprehensive and modern asylum legislation. It was first adopted, asylum law was first adopted in 1999. There were many amendments over the years, and the last one was in 2008, which entered into force in 2009. As I said, it's comprehensive, it's modern. By and large, it meets EU and international standards, but there are also some areas where improvements are needed, and we have been discussing this with the relevant authorities, and hopefully over the coming months we will be working on the necessary amendments that will be providing our support, our technical expertise, legal expertise to the authorities to identify those gaps and make improvements to them. So the legislation by and large is okay, room for improvement. A problem, as always, is with actual implementation.
Okay.
The best legislation in the world will not deliver if it's not effectively implemented. Again, that's an area where we are working closely with the authorities to find the best way out.
So the legislation is okay, but implementation has problems. You said there are areas that you're currently working with the government to improve. Could you specify what areas are this? Specifically, like which areas are you targeting with the government for the upcoming years in legislative?
Well, these are probably very technical to go through the refugee law, but areas relating to long-term residence, for example, for refugees, is not really properly addressed.
Okay.
The issue of housing is not addressed by the current refugee legislation. It's not provided for. People who make asylum claims on the basis of situations in their countries of origin that have changed after they have come to Armenia, what we call surplus claims is not properly. And then most critically, the balance between national security concerns and refugee protection principles and standards. This balance must be clearly drawn in the application of the law.
So overall, how would you assess the impact of the legislative reforms that have been carried out since 1992 up to today? How would you assess their impact on the refugees themselves? Do they help to alleviate their lives and their conditions to a degree UNHCR is satisfied? Or still the reforms are good, but the implementation has been wrong, has been worse and worse over the years?
There are two issues. One is there are two rather distinct groups of refugees, asylum seekers in Armenia. One is ethnic Armenians from Azerbaijan, from Iraq, now from Syria. Generally, they receive favorable treatment as ethnic Armenians in the asylum procedure. They don't generally go through thorough individual case-by-case examination of their claims. And then there are other nationalities, very few, from Africa, from Iran, altogether not more than, not even 100 over the last years. Their cases are dealt with differently from the ethnic Armenians. That's an area where, again, important improvements need to be made, because asylum processes should not make distinctions based on ethnicities. This is one. Secondly, it's one thing to give refugee status and asylum to a refugee, and quite another to know what to do next, what to do after that. The issue of integration, access to naturalization, to acquiring Armenian citizenship. Again, there is a facilitated procedure for acquisition of Armenian citizenship by ethnic Armenians from Azerbaijan, from Iraq, and now from Syria. For others, again, there is no facilitated procedure, and I'm not aware of any refugee, non-ethnic Armenian, who has actually acquired Armenian citizenship to date. So those are the two areas really that needs.
I know that UNHCR has done, over the years, has carried out certain projects to help the integration. And I know about this, like community technology access and all the other programs. Could you elaborate more on these programs? Have their targets changed? Are there programs that you did in 1990s and you do not do now? And how is the government cooperative in terms of these projects? Are these projects only UNHCR carried out, or these are projects that are co-financed or co-implemented by the government?
No, many of the self-reliance projects we have been implemented, they have been funded entirely by UNHCR. It's a community technology access project you refer to, which over the last 2 years the program graduated, I think, over 300 students. We have been implementing since last year, together with the State Employment Agency of the Ministry of Labor and Social Issues, a vocational training program linked to employment. Said we started last year, we continued this year. Hopefully, funding permitting, we want to continue also next year, because the refugees have really found it useful, because it's not just vocational training. After completion of the training, people are able to find immediately employment.
So you do post-project evaluation and see which projects are, so to say, satisfy the refugees, and you continue them?
Exactly. We started also last year scholarship programs for university students who are not able to continue higher education in public or private universities for lack of funding. We started with 11 or 12, I think, last year, and Right now we have 17 students enrolled in different universities in Yerevan.
And the scholarship covers entirely
entirely. It covers the tuition fees, living cost, transportation, books, and everything.
Okay.
And this is with generous funding support from the German government that is provided to UNHCR. This scholarship program was designed by UNHCR 20 years ago for refugees in less economically developed countries in Africa and Asia.
Okay.
And still that is our focus. Countries like Armenia are quite an exception because we generally believe that this should be taken care of by the government. But because of the gaps, we started this program also in Armenia.
So most of the programs that UNHCR carries out in Armenia are not specifically designed only for Armenia, but these are programs designed for less developed countries or poor countries.
That's correct.
Okay. Now coming to probably the most intriguing issue. I mean, the Syrian-Armenian crisis, this refugee crisis in Syria and its impact. I'd like to ask you first assess the crisis. I mean, I know that it's grave. I know that there are a lot of refugees. Does UNHCR have a specific project for all the countries who accept refugees from Syria? First, and second, in these terms, is the projects implemented in Armenia any way different from projects that UNHCR probably carries out in Turkey or other countries that accept refugees?
Over 300,000 Syrians have fled to the neighboring countries so far. Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey. Only Turkey over 100,000. Our estimates till the end of the year is that over 700,000, that number may reach over 700,000.
Okay.
Quite a jump from. And so far, UNHCR has been able to raise only a small fraction of the funding required to address and to meet the needs of these people. So we estimate by the end of the year, the number of Syrians in the neighboring countries, in the 4 countries I mentioned, will reach over 700,000. Armenia so far has received, these are estimates, between 3,000 to 5,000. It is difficult, the authorities tell me, to have exact figures because there is continuing movement, people coming, going back.
So, people use Armenia as a transitory country and come from Syria to Armenia and go to another country?
No, they go back to Syria. That's
they come to Armenia and go back to Syria?
Go to, families come and then the women and children remain behind, and then the husband goes, the father goes back to Syria to look after properties and businesses, to check, comes back again, and so ongoing movement, therefore difficult to have exact figures, but the estimates are anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000. And also according to the information we received, almost all are ethnic Armenian Syrians, whereas in the other countries there are non-ethnic Armenian Syrians. The government has done quite a lot in the legal field, in the legislative field, to facilitate their entry without visa requirements, with regards to duty, taxes, and etc. But the main problems, from what I understand from discussions with the Minister of Diaspora and other authorities, is housing, accommodation.
Okay.
People so far live, some in rented apartments, others with relatives, with friends, but over time maybe they'll run out of resources. Therefore, that needs to be looked at. Health services, primary health care generally available on equal footing with Armenian citizens, but then where payment is required, that may be a problem. We help as much as we can. The number of Syrians who are registered with the State Migration Service as asylum seekers, as refugees, is around 215, 220. only out of the 3,000, 5,000.
Who have registered?
Because again, ethnic Armenian Syrians who have come to Armenia are protected against expulsion, are protected against deportations, have the right to remain here as long as they want. No problem. Therefore, for them, applying for refugee status is not a necessity compared to other.
You also talked about this idea that Armenia has carried out a lot of, that the government has carried out a lot in terms of the legislative aspect. Still, I'd like to ask this question. Does the legislation, does the legislation provide for Syrian Armenian better integration into the Armenian society? The refugees that come from Syria. Should the legislation address this issue, their integration, or it's more of a society's job to carry out, not the job of the legislator?
Integration has to happen at all levels. Integration has to happen at the legislative level, at the social level, at the economic level, at the cultural level, if you like. It has to happen at all levels in order to achieve full integration. Legislation is the basis. As I say, generally legislation for ethnic Armenians, refugees, is not a problem. At the economic level, when the economic conditions are not fully conducive to local integration right now, in the sense that people have difficulties in finding gainful employment.
Okay.
And that is the key, really. If you are unemployed, you don't have any income, you don't have any resources, then it's a problem to afford for decent housing, decent health services, and good schooling for your children, and that obviously.
There has been this rumors in the country that in terms of legislation, in terms of the visa facilitation, so to say, for Syrian Armenians, the necessary factor has been the issue that either one of the parents should have been Armenian so that to receive the visa easily. What about those who do not have this factor in their hands? Has there been any problem in this aspect in the country that you have observed, and how deep this problem is?
Well, I'm aware of one specific case from Syria, which from the media, and then had discussions with the relevant authorities. A family of 9, I believe, which included 5 children, 2 women, and 1 or 2 men, who were refused entry at Zvatnos airport because they were not able. Although it was clear they came from Syria through Turkey, they were not able to prove their ethnic Armenian origin, and therefore they were returned after 3 days. I think they were stranded at the airport to Turkey. This is indeed very problematic. As a signatory to international refugee treaties, Armenia has the obligation to receive and consider asylum application from any national, no matter whether the individual has historical links to Armenia. So the Armenian ethnicity must not be a requirement to permit asylum seekers into the territory and access to asylum procedures.
Okay.
The argument was that people should obtain entry visa before coming to Armenia's border. Ethnic Armenians are exempted. Well, asylum seekers, refugees generally have no possibility to obtain visas in their countries of origin. In Syria, Aleppo, maybe elsewhere there may be Armenian consulate, but in many other countries in Africa and elsewhere there is no Armenian representation.
Our problem of this type observed in other countries that directly neighbor Syria. This problem of distinction of ethnicity. Are you aware of any of this type of problem existing supposedly in Turkey, are in Jordan in terms of receiving refugees and not giving and treating differently those who do not ethnically believe to belong to their
ethnicities?
No,
over 100,000 Syrians who are in Turkey were not screened to determine their ethnicity and religion and etc. People are allowed because they fled
because they're refugees.
The conflict in Syria. The same with Syrians who are admitted into Lebanon and Jordan or Iraq. They are not admitted based on their religion, or it's based on objective factors that force them to flee their countries.
Okay.
So you cannot discriminate people on the basis of their religion or ethnicity. This is not allowed by international law, obviously.
Are there any specific projects you are currently implementing with Armenian government in terms of the upcoming winter and the refugees being anywhere anyhow protected from the conditions that the winter brings with it?
Yeah, we are working now on a winterization program for newly arriving refugees, whether from Syria or from other countries, for whom this is their first winter, to provide with some winter clothing and winter boots. We are working on it and hope we will start with our NGO partners and government authorities to provide that support over the coming weeks, because the weather is starting to change already.
Sure.
So this, yes, indeed, is one of our priorities. The main, you asked at the beginning what our focus is right now. Our main focus now is on the legislative front, on capacity building. As I said, we have done a lot of work in supporting the government to address the housing needs, the health needs, the educational needs of the refugees. Now we are going back to our original functions, if you like, which is advisory services, legal advice, policy advice, to ensure that the legislation is in accordance with international standards. The procedures for identifying refugees work effectively, and they identify refugees properly, and no refugee is denied status and asylum unfairly. These are the areas we are focusing now and over the coming period. And this is what we do in over 120 countries in which we operate.
So if we try to sum up our discussion today, how would you evaluate Armenia's pace of reforming? Retrospectively, do we reform quick enough? Do you see that the reforms that we are taking, that we are undertaking, have the quick impact on those who are subject to these reforms? Or we are reforming slowly and there is a necessity to give some speed to the reforming process?
No, the work that has been done so far, I can say, is satisfactory, both at the legislative level and at the day-to-day practical application. Yes, there is room for improvement, as always, because this is a completely new area for Armenia. But legislation is in place, procedures are in place, structures are in place. The know-how is there by and large, and with our support, with our capacity building efforts, we see improvements. And equally important, solutions are being found. Say, over 80,000 of the refugees who came from Azerbaijan are Armenian citizens now. They are no longer refugees. That's a big achievement, because in many countries this is one of our biggest problems.
There remain refugees and not...
It's not identifying refugees, but then what to do with those refugees afterwards, access to citizenship, where they wait for ages in some countries. So this is a major achievement, and then I would encourage the authorities to do more and also to do the same for the non-ethnic Armenian refugees, who again are only a handful here.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.